Hey, have you ever had to learn piano repertoire fast? Well, I have, and it can feel like a lot of pressure. And what if you don't have the tools to help you learn pieces quickly? Well, the results can be a little embarrassing, right? Well, you're in luck today because right now you're about to learn 5 tips on how knowing music theory, which of course is my expertise, helps a pianist learn repertoire really quickly and successfully. I'm Gloria St. Germain from Ultimate Music Theory, and my very special guest today is the expert, Nicole DePablo. And welcome, Nicole.
Hi, everyone.
Now, Nicole is an online adjunct lecturer in music at Indiana University, and she's a sought-after collaborative pianist and accompanist, a pedagogical composer and instructor of piano and music theory and composition. So, Nicole, I'm so excited that you're going to share your inside secrets of how the foundation of music theory helps you really master your musicianship skills. Now, before you share your inside secrets, can you just tell us a little bit about, what motivated you on your musical journey and in your business, Nicole?
Well, honestly, I started freelancing as an accompanist and private teacher just to make some extra cash and keep in touch with my performer side while I was in my first year of PhD coursework in music theory at Indiana University, Bloomington. I had done a little chamber work in undergrad, but mainly I was performing solo repertoire because that's what undergrads do.
Right.
But I soon realized that collaborative piano or piano accompaniment and pedagogy were really a much better match for my skill set and interests than academia. And then, of course, the academic market crashed.
Right.
So after coursework, I spent a year as a duo pianist with the violinist Amy Lee. We call ourselves the Duo del Mare, aboard 2 different cruise ships.
Okay, so we got to kind of go, wait a minute. Wow, that sounds like a pretty great job. That's kind of sweet. So you're performing music on a cruise ship, probably like loving the buffet, traveling, and you're getting paid for it. I love it. How can we get in on that? And so now you probably obviously had a blast, and everyone was so jealous of you. And so now, what was the next great adventure?
Well, really, that was probably the greatest adventure.
Yeah.
But from there, returned to Bloomington, and pedagogy and collaborative performance gradually became my main outlets while in Bloomington. And, I find that I'm pretty skilled at diagnosing individual students' skill gaps and tailoring programs of study that catch them up in those areas. And that translates well to both piano and vocal coaching.
Right.
My collaborative work, so my accompanying is mostly with voice majors. Just IU has an enormous voice department. It's very well known. There's just a huge number of singers who are always ready to collaborate. So that worked out really well for me.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think teaching really is such a rewarding profession. And sometimes I think it can be challenging in really understanding how are we going to connect with our students so that they can really excel in how they learn best. I'm an NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic practitioner. So I study and research a lot on learning styles and visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners and how we can connect. And I think especially when you're teaching groups, that's the challenge, right? Is really being able to identify the learning styles of those individuals. And I know that you've taught a lot of group sessions as well as individuals. How has that gone for you?
Well, I'm teaching fundamentals music theory for non-majors at IU, and that is going well. Of course, you have certain technical hiccups, but with the online interface, a lot of their assignments self-grade, and that works out. I enjoy classroom teaching to a point, and this is a really good group that I have right now. So shout out to any of my Z111 students who are watching. Um,
Yay!
but, with any large class, you just can't get to know each student on the same level as you can when you are their private teacher or performing partner.
Yes,
And I enjoy the more relaxed atmosphere you can cultivate in an individual lesson.
for
And
sure.
classroom management alone can be a little exhausting unless you're very much an extrovert or you have a great group.
Right. Yeah. And I think that group often takes on its own personality, right? And it's
Yeah.
really true, Nicole. Absolutely. I think when first getting started as a teacher, it's probably good to just explore probably both the private and the group to see, what lights you up, right? What's your
Mhm.
passion and how can you serve your students best? So, how did you get started with your studio?
Well, immediate financial considerations were obviously a big factor, but I also realized I had something to offer that many of the area's piano majors did not, because
Right.
I have experience in several fields, so solo piano, composition, theory, accompanying, and I already had several years of classroom teaching experience under my belt from my music theory TA positions at IU.
Right.
And I also learned healthy technique relatively late at age 18. So I could fully recall that learning process and pass it on to teen and adult students who needed technique rehabilitation.
Hmm.
Most of your average piano majors, of course, had those basic technique skills taught when they were too young to remember the process. So without specific teacher training, it's really hard for them to replicate that with their own students.
Absolutely, Nicole. It's funny that you say that because even though I started teaching at the age of 16, I thought I knew everything. Ha ha ha.
And we all.
Their money back. Here's your cash back. But I taught successfully for many years. And it was really when I went back to studying later as an adult, I completed my ARCT with the Royal Conservatory of Music, that the skills I acquired, they were fresh in my mind. And in fact, I was teaching as I was studying. So my students often said, "Oh, I wonder what she learned last week. She's going to teach it this week." And I think I'm so glad that you're here, Nicole, because it's never too late to learn something new. And I think by implementing it, you really need to teach it immediately to your students because that's really, what we learn. And when we teach it, it's really how we reinforce what we've just learned. And speaking of something new, I want to give a quick shout out to our listeners and viewers today. I see that we've already got some comments coming in here. And Christopher says, the things you've said are reasons I've decided to keep my group small. 3, the biggest current group, 4 being the max that I might want in one group. So just before we go on to your tips, and I see we've got a few comments coming in here, Nicole, what do you consider to be a good number if you are going to be deciding to teach music theory in a group?
Well, right now I have 33, and that is a big class.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is one of the more popular classes in that department at IU.
Right.
And the music and general studies department, it's thriving, and there's a lot of course offerings there, so it is very popular. If I were teaching in a private studio setting but offering group theory classes, I think 10 would probably be my max, and it would probably depend on the age and the particular
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting. I think the largest group that I've taught is probably 7. And
Yeah.
or maybe there was, well, it was a young group of 7 and then there was some adults, so probably about 14. But kudos to you because there's a lot of responsibility in teaching a large group, and then you've got to mark all the homework or make
Yeah.
sure that they're doing it, and comprehension, right? Because it's one thing to just sit in a class, but if the kids aren't really learning anything because they're not implementing what they've learned, then it's kind of for naught. But speaking of learning something new, so thanks for that question, Christopher. We're really excited because we're going to learn something new right now. So you may want to get a pen and a piece of paper out here because Nicole has got some great tips for you. So you're going to learn 5 tips. These are her inside secrets on how knowing music theory helps pianists learn repertoire quickly. And that's really the key, isn't it, Nicole? We want to be able to
Absolutely.
learn something quickly. So tell us about tip number 1, recognizing formal landmarks.
Exactly. So knowing large forms and
Right.
being able to recognize their landmarks helps me plot out exactly what I need to practice and what is duplicated across a piece, thereby saving time.
Yeah.
We have very little time, so we need to save it. So
Absolutely.
if you're learning the Franck violin sonata or Brahms clarinet sonata movement, both of which I have worked on or am working on, you want to know which technical passages are different as you approach different areas of the piece and need extra practice versus what comes back. So you
Right.
can practice that returning passage in one area and you'll have it covered when it recurs.
Yes.
Collaborative pianists frequently need to learn piles of repertoire on very short notice. So efficiency in the practice process is absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm.
And rote learning just doesn't work for most people with this kind of speed. So sometimes I also choose to memorize my collaborative repertoire, and this speeds up that process.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a passage recurs, I already have it from when I heard it last in a sonata form. That would be in the exposition and the recap, for example.
Yeah, and that's a great tip, Nicole, because I really think, if you don't take a second to analyze the music before you start learning it, it's just you're kind of walking blindly down the tunnel, right? And just by taking a minute to find all of those little, tips and tricks there, it really is going to help you learn the piece faster. So that's it. That's a good tip. Take that moment to check that out. So that's tip number one. So having the tools to recognize landmarks, technical passages, and practice effectively, right? It really does speed up the learning process. So tip number two is knowing harmonic progressions and voice leading paths. So can you just elaborate on that, Nicole?
Yes. So knowing the most typical harmonic progressions and voice leading paths within a given key, as taught in your freshman and sophomore theory courses, most particularly, helps me more accurately predict and prepare for what is coming next when I'm sight reading, which happens in many, many voice lessons, choral rehearsals, that kind of thing. So if the given piece is too technically challenging to sight read well, if it requires drilling, I can just look at the passage and boil it down to its skeletal progressions, and then think of that stock progression as a single chunk, and that just speeds up processing. And then I can play something that supports the singer harmonically using that skeleton, even if I'm not playing all the 30-second notes.
Right.
Because I need to practice. Or in many cases, I need to reduce something myself, like in aria and concerto reductions, because those aren't meant to be played at face value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love that tip because it's so true, Nicole, that as an accompanist, well, number one, you're there to support the singer, right? They're the showcase. But understanding those important notes, so to speak, and the harmonic progression, they're going to help you be an effective accompanist. Because if our there's no stopping. Like the singer is singing, right? You just have to keep going. So I think that's a really, really great tip.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And so when you're also asked to play concerto, like, can you give us maybe, or aria reduction, can you kind of expand on how that would work?
Yeah, so when I'm asked to play a concerto or aria reduction that was originally for orchestra, I can then use my knowledge of voice leading and counterpoint gained from my theory courses to create something that's both playable and musical, with all the chord tones in each harmony represented. So, I might run into a thick chord where there's two of the chordal third. So I may choose not to double the third in that triad when one of those thirds is beyond my reach, because I know that thirds, at least in major triads, they project very well, and you really only need one. And in many undergraduate theory courses, we sort of frown on them doubling the third because it can become a double bleeding tone. So that's where that rule tends to show up. This stuff also gives me flexibility in knowing how to revoice things so they can fit smaller hands. So I've used this knowledge to my great advantage in creating accessible accompaniments, which are genuinely playable reductions of otherwise very difficult opera arias.
Absolutely. I think too, and you brought up a really great point, Nicole, because as teachers, and obviously you've taught a lot of students, we need to take into account those little digits, right? Because if you have small hands, and we've all seen many very young students play these massive pieces, how do they do that? And sometimes even in reaching those, they will almost play it as a broken chord because they can't technically reach all of those notes at the same time. So I think it's important to recognize your strengths and weaknesses, A, as a performer yourself or accompanist, and B, in your teaching, right? How can we help our students reach all those things? So thanks for sharing that. Now, I want to make a quick note here because we do have some other questions coming in here. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes below so that you can check out the accessible accompaniment by Nicole. So you're not going to miss that. So don't panic about, well, where can I get all this? So I'll put it in the show notes when we're done. And also, if you want to connect with Nicole, just put your notes in the chat here, and after our interview, I'm sure she'll have a chance to go in and answer your questions and share other things with you. So don't be shy. I should check out. I know we've got some other little comments coming in here. A few. Oh, good morning. Yes, so great to see you, Nicole. Oh, you've got some fans. Awesome. Now that brings us to tip number 3, which is knowing figured bass. Now, I actually love teaching this, maybe because I had a great teacher that explained it so well. And how do you approach teaching this, Nicole?
Well, I just emphasize how practically useful it is, because some students don't understand its purpose, but it still appears frequently in Baroque keyboard parts.
Right.
And this has given me a serious advantage over other collaborative pianists who are not experienced in reading continuo parts. I emphasize that they're like 18th century lead sheets.
Yes.
And young singers in particular do a lot of Baroque music because it's less technically demanding in some ways, and the orchestra's smaller, so they're not trying to project over an orchestra of that size. So I really try to emphasize its usefulness and get students excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, you mentioned lead sheets. And I think the more that we can learn root quality chord symbols and figured bass, and it is the language of music, and it enables you to, I think, play more freely, right? And as you said, knowing music theory, such as figured bass, I mean, that's a bonus, because when it comes to learning music quickly, we want to be able to just recognize that. And it's more fun, right? When you feel confident and you're not afraid, you're like, oh, I got this, I'm going to be good. And so it brings us to tip number 4. And I love this tip. It might be my favorite one. And that is recognizing harmonic and structural norms, as you call them. So can you elaborate on what do you mean by harmonic and structural norms?
Well, for an example of that, let's say, 2 chords tend to go to 5 chords, which then go to 1 chords. Let's say you have a 2 chord going to a 1 chord, or a 5 chord that's going to a 2 chord.
Yes.
That is going to sound unusual to the ear of a person who has just played and read a lot of tonal music, because that's backwards from what a typical progression is. So you may want to look at that passage and say, hey, is there something expressive happening here that I need to pay attention to, especially if there's text?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that it really is important. I mean, I agree 100% that recognizing the harmonic and structural differences of a piece, and then exploring the variations in how to present it, whether we're changing dynamics or especially if you're having that, back and forth conversation musically, it really allows us to showcase the piece with interest and variety. And sometimes that's what they call making it your own, right? You're going to be a singer. You want to make it your own. You want to say, oh, that's really, I like how they did that. It's so interesting. So that's very cool. And I think your final tip, number 5, coming in at number 5, is knowing quick study theory. So which elements are necessary, Nicole?
Well, this may seem pretty basic, but being completely secure in your ability to recognize key signatures is absolutely essential for good sight reading and good quick study, provided that your scales in every key are also solid and your fingers will find those scale degrees without you really having to think about it.
Right. And I think that really is the well-rounded musician. I mean, all the tips that you've given us, and, I talk to obviously a lot of music teachers and attend a lot of conferences and in presenting. And I always find it interesting when some teachers actually will say, well, I don't really teach music theory. I just kind of do it while they're in their piano lesson. And I'm thinking to myself, may I just have 5 minutes of your time? Because everything you've shared with us, Nicole, is just so obvious, right? That you
Yeah.
need these tools so that you can be not only confident, but effective and be able to pick up a piece of music and do the analysis. And the 5 tips that you've given us today, it really is important. And it kind of leads me into my next question, because in connecting with other teachers, what do you see as the one thing missing from today's teaching techniques to really help students, which is obviously what we're all about, right?
Yeah. So, so obviously, I do find that integrating theory into the repertoire learning process and demonstrating how it's relevant to the average student, that is missing in many, but not all studios. That's why I'm doing this interview.
Yes.
More broadly, I also find that healthy technique and alignment training are often missing, just due to the 5-finger happy instructional curricula that are out there.
Yeah.
I recently completed the Tales of a Musical Journey workshop with Irina Gorin, who's fabulous. And I see many parallels with the Hungarian school sort of technique instruction I received from my fabulous teacher back in Michigan, Michelle Cooker.
Yeah.
And I look forward to integrating these perspectives as I begin to establish a teaching practice in Cleveland.
Yes, and that's so key. And I'm glad that you mentioned Irina Gorin. I had the privilege of interviewing her, several months ago now, and her journey was so interesting. And obviously, she's traveled the world and continues to do so. And as educators, we still learn from each other. And every time I do an interview, which I love doing, and I learn, from people like you and from people like Irina Gorin and all the other people that I interview. And it's really powerful in this day and age that we can be online and learn from each other. And in case anyone has missed any of our previous interviews, you can check them all out on the Ultimate Music Theory YouTube channel. All of our interviews are there, so you can go back and check out the one that I did with Irina. Now you're in Cleveland. Woo-hoo!
I am.
The big move you did. I want to wish you all the best, of course, in your new teaching practice in Cleveland, because that's super excited. So other than maybe we want to, get registered with you as an educator, or how can we connect and learn more about you, your materials, the resources you've got? What's up?
Well, I have links to a website, my YouTube channel, my Facebook fan page. So those links should be coming below in the show footage.
Yes. Yep. I'll put them in the show notes for sure, because I think it's important for us. And nowadays, even if you want to check out Nicole's website, her YouTube channel, her Facebook page, you can actually, get in touch, connect, and learn more about how you can implement these 5 tips that you've learned today into your teaching studio and help your students grow. I mentioned about the interviews that I've done and how we learn through connecting with people like Nicole. And one of the interviews I did recently was with Cody Lee, who just won the America's Got Talent 2009.
Yeah.
And so his teacher, Gigi Koo, was my guest just about 3 weeks ago. And she shared how she taught Cody Lee and how you teach someone who is autistic and blind. I mean, that's like a whole nother question about how can we teach these people. So please take the time to check out the show notes and connect with Nicole, because you're going to learn a lot of things on how you can help your students, because you never know, your student might be the next AGT winner, right? So we've got to keep supporting them. So I'll put all of the information about Nicole in the show notes when we're done. Now I have a little question for you. So we've talked about learning and sharing ideas. What's coming up next in your professional development?
Well, of course, I've just relocated to Cleveland. I'm now on faculty at the Westlake Music Academy for piano theory and composition.
Wow.
I'm also the staff accompanist for Case Western Reserve University's concert choir, which is their auditioned ensemble for students throughout Case. They're not necessarily music majors. I'm also continuing to teach music theory online, of course, for IU Music and General Studies. I'm also the music theory instructor at Liberty Park Music. I've been doing that for several years. So it's a subscription-based model for pre-recorded video lessons. People in remote areas can benefit from that. Doing a few other miscellaneous pedagogical composition projects and the like.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. And so you can follow me on Facebook and YouTube and keep tabs on what I'm doing.
Yeah. It sounds like you're super busy. So
a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. Oh my gosh, Nicole. So as teachers, which obviously you and I are, but maybe, just kind of reflecting back, what's one tip that you could share, because there's a lot of teachers who are, just wanting to move forward with their studio business. They've got goals and they want to achieve their goals. So what's maybe the one tip that could resonate with them?
Well, my biggest tip would just be to find what makes you different from every
Right.
other teacher out there. Obviously, we have millions of piano teachers out there.
Yes.
So for me, it's the interest and skills I have in teaching adults, particularly with technique, something adult transfers always need help with. Also integrating piano accompanying and collab skills into solo pedagogy, teaching that Hungarian school technique, which is a little less well known than others, and teaching students with joint laxity, which I also have. Some people know that as being double jointed.
Right.
And so many people teach piano that, unless you're lucky or you live in a rural area, you really need that one distinguishing factor to get yourself out there and build your studio. So for some teachers, maybe it's you speak another language that very few people know and can't teach in, so you can
Right.
reach that market. Or you teach technique from a different perspective, you're experienced in certain special needs, and so on. So you really have a lot of options.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that you just said that really resonated with me is to find your uniqueness, what
Mm-hmm.
makes you different. And I think that really is the key, because you're right, there's, a million piano teachers out there, which is awesome because, it makes the world a happier place. And did you know, and I'm sure you do, that learning music makes you smarter, right? But here's the secret. Teaching music makes you better looking. I bet you didn't know that. But anyway, it's a lot. Well, I'll just use that. That's just my tagline. I want to say thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing your amazing story and your 5 tips on how to learn music faster, because really it's all about how can we develop our musicianship skills. And if you've enjoyed this video, and I'm sure you have, please like, comment, and share. Join our Ultimate Music Theory Facebook group so you can network with other musicians and educators such as Nicole, of course. And if you want all the latest interviews and more music theory tips, go ahead and subscribe to our Ultimate Music Theory YouTube channel. And don't forget to join our Ultimate Music Theory Facebook group. And we release new videos every week, so you got to stay tuned. So remember, I'm going to put the show notes in here so you can get a hold of Nicole. And I want to say thank you, Nicole, because it's really been a delight sharing this with our viewers today. And I just want to wish you all the best in your next adventures.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll give a shout out to all those musicians in Cleveland that are looking for a music teacher. Now we know we have a new superstar, and go ahead and check her out. Thanks, Nicole.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, have a great day, everyone.
You too.